With Module 3, we continue to establish the big picture, discussing cognition alongside motor development. Recall, with the dynamical systems perspective, there are three major constraint factors that contribute to the emergence of behavior. In this case, we are going to focus solely on the organism in the domains of human development that we specifically have to discuss in this course. Clearly, the motor domain is a big emphasis, but alongside the motor domain, we have to acknowledge the contribution of both the affective and the cognitive domains. Physical will have its own chapter, but all four contribute to the organism or the individual characteristics that shape behavior. With respect to cognitive development, a huge figure in the field is Jean Piaget. He is a Swiss scientist credited for crafting the theory of cognitive development, outlining the four stages wherein cognition progresses from the building the simplest forms of knowledge achieved during the sensorimotor stage from birth to 2 years to the most complex formal operational cognitive thoughts. Of these four stages, the first two, sensorimotor and the pre-operational stages, are the most relevant ones to exercise scientists, specifically for motor developmentalists. However, the two other stages will be acknowledged, the concrete operational from 8 to 11 years and the formal operational from 11 to 12 years. We will also discuss the buzzwords or the main concepts associated with them, but beyond that, no further discussions will be involved as we will focus our attention on the first two. The first stage of developing one's thinking capacity highlights the primacy of sensation and motor. Thus, the sensorimotor stage. Using the senses and movement, the body acquires bits of information which become instrumental for thought and analysis. When all is said and done, the body is the primary tool by which cognition is developed. The body has to move in order to maximize its sensation. Thus, the buzzword is thinking with the body. Following that stage is the preoperational stage from 2 to 8 years old. During this period, the primary areas of development are language and reasoning. And then, as previously said, the concrete, operational, and formal operational. Before we look into the buzzwords, I'd like you to look at the ages shown in here, mainly to highlight that despite the genius of Jean Piaget, his theory or his thought process is not without flaw. Look at the ages. How many of us really think that cognition doesn't go beyond 12 years? Do we stop developing our thought processes beyond 12 years? Recognize that Jean Piaget's sample size for the experiments that he conducted to come up with this theory is an N of 3. Who are those three? His three children. So apart from having a small sample size, one has to recognize the biased sample. The fact that these are three children of a brilliant man already tells you this is not ordinary. As far as the buzzwords, I've already emphasized the fact that sensorimotor stage talks about thinking with the body. Secondly, the preoperational stage, I've emphasized reasoning and language development. Now for the rest of these two, it's mainly used as a reference for what the first two stages have not yet achieved. Concrete operational. Children 8 years and below have not mastered the idea of conservation and seriation. We're going to talk about that clearly in the next slides. Finally, formal operational. This is the stage where the kids tackle abstract and problem-solving skills. Let's look at the sensorimotor stage with a little bit more detail. When you're thinking with the body, the child realizes the early capability to build memories using senses and movement. For example, visually, the baby is not born blind, unlike old wives' tales. Vision is available from day one. There is a test to test vision. Then, as the progress continues, visual fixation, or the ability to focus and the ability to track movement, including sounds where they have to realign their focus, all of those are evident from the earliest stages. However, seemingly nonsense games such as peekaboo, all of these are not just for fun. It becomes even clearer that the baby is a thinking creature. We realized very early that fun games is basically a major platform for the children to develop their thought processes. With peekaboo, what is highlighted is a concept called object permanence. Because an object disappears or the person, it does not mean that they cease to exist. And that involves some thought processes. To the child, there are consequences of this sensory motor platform. There are motor consequences in that the child starts to search. He uses his eyes, he uses his body, he uses his ears to listen to sounds that indicate that that person is still there somehow. Therefore, there's an integration of vision, audition, tactile, and motor consequences to the what started out as a very menial game. Essentially, the baby is integrating everything that has to do with building memories. In the classic study by Weisberg and Rovi Collier in 1998, the building of memories is exemplified by the unique paradigm that they used. Look at the picture. In this picture, you have mobiles hanging above the crib. A mobile attached to the foot of the infant is remembered the following day. Why? Because the paradigm is such that whenever the baby kicks, because the mobile is tethered to his foot, it either makes a sound or does something visually stimulating, makes the early association of his enjoyment. The infant is able to make the connection between the cause and effect. I kick, therefore it moves. I kick, it has a fun side to it. In essence, as early as 3 months, children are experimenting with their bodies, children are experimenting with the visual array, and alongside, that's transferred to all other things that they come into contact with, objects that they touch, its size, shape, weight, and texture. Primarily, it's a setup that allows them to associate cause and effect. Now, what happens as the experimenters push the limits? They take off the ribbon. Therefore, now the baby, as he kicks, there is no more cause. There is still the cause, his thinking is kicking, but there's no effect. As the mobile is detached, the child first kicks vigorously, but eventually the kicking stops, realizing that now the cause and effect have been dissociated. Moving on towards the pre-operational stage. As mentioned earlier, one featured characteristic of this stage is the development of reasoning. Unfortunately, at this point, the child does not yet exhibit the full capability to organize logical thought. They are unable to understand the concept of conservation, either of mass or volume. And this is where the genius of Piaget comes in. He is the one that came out with a logical test to be able to understand the thought processes of a child, where the child is shown two containers of the same amount of volume, 16 ounces, in the same identical container. When one container is emptied to a different size and shape, the child implicitly was asked at the beginning and showed that it's the same volume that he is dealing with. But when he is asked later which one has more, the evident answer is the one with a taller structure. Thus, the child is not able to grasp the idea of conservation of volume. Similarly, conservation of mass is not fully realized in children 8 years below. Conservation of mass, there's no picture provided in this slide, but you know this is the classical question of which one is heavier or has more mass. A pound of cotton candy versus a pound of gold. As adults, we know that a pound is a pound is a pound is a pound, regardless of how the mass looks like. But what do you think the child will choose? Like every other logical, quote unquote, logical thinking child, of course it's the cotton candy. It is large, it covers greater amount of space. Um, as far as seriation, everything is about putting things in series. The American alphabet is in series of letters from A to Z, A, B, C, D, and so on. In a test of logical thought, in a tennis ball canister having only one mouth or one opening, if you put in balls in a series A, B, and C, you ask the child to indicate what is the order of the balls coming out. As adults, we know that the order will be reversed, C, B, and A. But because to this point, 8 years and below, the way we have taught our children, it's always in the process of series, and there's a formula, A to Z. Child will respond, ABC came in, ABC will come out. So literally, it is at this stage during the preoperational period where they start to build those thought processes. Finally, the second feature of this stage is language development. Movement is of strong potential role to facilitate learning and development of thought processes, particularly that of language. Because the body is a primary tool and because children are not as well versed at this young age, movement becomes the primary medium. Ironically, the potential of movement for language learning has not been fully exploited. Despite having established the findings of Piaget many years ago, little appreciation is evident in using movement to teach language and comprehension. We have confined our kids to learning sitting down in a room where they have to do everything from a pencil paper kind of setup. However, if you look at the thought processes of 4-year-old kids on the playground, foreign kids who have no word of English, but simply because you will allow them the avenue of play, they'll probably learn a lot more in the playground. Because play is more fun and play is functional. You either stop or go and say hooray and great job. Clearly, another area where Piaget's finding is not being taken seriously is in public education and policy. Consider, for example, that to this day, college students are expected to learn pass foreign language courses. When we know that the system in the middle school and high school years is when the foreign language courses are being taught. Here we go back to the preoperational stage. We know that the mind is most absorbent for language learning between 2 to 8 years. Piaget has repeatedly said this, and numerous studies have been done on lexical access and the ability to develop language. It is so much easier to learn them at the younger ages. But here we are in the 21st century, we're still using old systems to teach foreign language to middle schoolers and high schoolers. Why don't we start in elementary school? This is the last slide, having covered the two primary cognitive stages of Piaget, sensory motor stage and a preoperational stage.